Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about some issues that are in the forefront of the news and some that aren't. But at the end of the day, it's always amazing when you see how much work our rep and even our senator, but our rep has to put in to take care of Milford. Now, if there is somebody who doesn't know you, let's start with an introduction.
Al, thank you. Brian Murray, State Representative for the towns of Milford, Mendon, and Hopedale.
And like I said before the show, I was surprised that I opened up my ballot yesterday and you're being reelected.
Every 2 years we run, both senators, representatives, and it comes on you fast.
Can you explain to me the logic? Because it seems like we blinked and all of a sudden we're having another show about you being reelected.
Yeah, I mean, for as long as I can remember, terms have been 2 years. So, I suppose the thought is, folks want accountability. They want to make sure that they can, be able to choose their representatives and senators, which is fine. The reality is it does cut in the time where you can actually legislate because for a first-time legislator, for example, I mean, you get elected, they swear you in January. I mean, that first year is almost kind of a whirlwind, just trying to figure out what's going on. Then you go into the second year. The session ends July 31st because the campaign season starts after that. So it really kind of limits, what can be done legislatively.
Well, it just seems like every 2 years. Now, I had heard the number that it costs $25,000 to run for a select board seat in Milford.
Yeah, it depends, and it depends on the race. It depends on the seat. Some representative seats can be upwards of $100,000, depending upon the demographics and the race that's out there. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Also, I'm very fortunate this session that I don't have an opponent.
Your opponent didn't spend much money.
Yeah, no, I don't have to do that. So consequently, I've been able to help a lot of my colleagues who do have races. As we were talking about, I was just out Sunday in Milford actually knocking on doors for our Senator, Becca Rausch, who does have an opponent and is seeking reelection.
It just seems like, I can't remember, was it Richie Neal or one of the U.S. House of Reps had mentioned that you get elected, you get the weekend off, and then Monday morning you start raising money.
Well, it's a little different in Congress, and yeah, they have to raise money, and that's a huge part of their job. So we don't, really do that. Myself, I've only had fundraisers when I've had opponents because I just think that money is given to you from folks who, feel that it's for reelection.
But you've never been a big spender on campaigns.
No, I really haven't. I really haven't. I've just done what I think is necessary, and work with people directly, and just kind of deal with the news and the issues that are out there.
It just seems to me that if it was 3 or 4 years, you'd have a little more breathing room to work on legislation.
Well, that would be true. That would be true. It's a shame because so many bills die really kind of for a lack of time. Because what folks don't understand is on most bills, particularly controversial ones, there are a number of people who have very different viewpoints on a particular piece of legislation. So through the democratic process, trying to get that input from all of the different stakeholders consequently, changes the complexion of the legislation, and also raises certain roadblocks, obstacles, problems that need to be overcome. And sometimes you can't do that in the time period that you have, so the bill gets filed next session.
And you hope that you're going to be there next session to continue it.
Absolutely, and you build off the support that you had from the prior session. You build off what you learned from the prior session, need to adjust things where you can, and you go forward. But typically, legislation takes multiple sessions to pass.
Yeah, that's what it hit me to say. If we're turning over our legislators, then everybody has different priorities.
Well, that's true too. That's true too. Yep, absolutely. So some bills get tossed by the wayside. Some bills get picked up. I picked up a bill voluntarily that Rep. Carolyn Dykema from Hopkinton, she left the legislature for the private sector, and she had a bill that would require new construction to have bollards in front of storefront buildings, because I think you've seen there's a lot of situations where
Drive-throughs?
cars go through buildings. So the bill would require bollards to be placed in front of businesses that face roadways, that kind of stuff. So I filed that bill for the first time this session, and of course, there was some opposition to it from the development industry, the construction industry. I don't know why. I mean, I didn't think it was a major expense, but that was there. So consequently, it got sent to study, but I'll probably be looking to, file that again in January.
What's the turnover in the House? Is it large or?
I think this year is not only for the number, but I think for the quality of the legislators who are not returning. And I want to say off the top of my head, there's probably about 15 or 20 representatives who are not seeking reelection. But I think the point that's significant about that is many of them have been there for many years. They're in positions of leadership, committee chairs, majority leaders. So it's a little unusual, I think, at least it has been in my 8 years there, to see that kind of turnover from people who have been there for so long. But it's a tough job. It's with you 24/7, and folks that have been doing it 15, 20, 25 years, I can see where they'd like to try something different.
Well, I think about it. It reminds me of like people who want to get into teaching. You have to do it for the passion because the salary is not commensurate with the effort. When I think of first year House of Reps of Massachusetts, we're making 60, 70 grand.
Yeah, so it's that kind of a job, and typically, I mean, I was fortunate because I was practicing private, and I could adjust that a little bit with my practice. But yeah, it's a challenging job. It can be a lot of fun, but it is a lot of work, and I mean, it's not a job that I would have wanted to have when my kids were small, when my kids were younger. You remember all of the soccer games that you have, and well, you're not really able to see any of that because the schedule you have is kind of crazy. So I was fortunate that when my kids are going through school like yours, we were able to go to all the games and enjoy all of that sort of thing. So now, my kids, they're off and gone and everything.
Well,
So
I can see somebody like you who's been there for years. You've got your mortgage paid or the kids are through college. You can afford to work for passion. But, think about back when the kids were in high school. Not only couldn't you go to the soccer games, today you're looking at $90,000 a year per child for school.
Oh yeah. But really, it was the time. My kids, like yours, were very active, and were very, very lucky, and enjoyed so many great moments of everything that they did. And I was lucky I was able to do that. I can see, and I remember our good friend John Fernandez, because he did do this while his kids were in school, and John, he had to miss some things that Michael and Elizabeth did, and I can only imagine how difficult that was.
It just hits me when I sit there and say, with all the money we spend, I'd rather make the Senate, the House positions paid well and force people to say, okay, it's not a part-time job. We're not going to pretend it's a part-time job. this is full-time, like we all did at a peak of our careers, 50, 60 hours a week, but you get paid for it.
Yeah, and that's of course a different issue than the time, which was the thing that I see would have been different.
Well, when you start talking about senior people leaving, you can't easily replace them with junior people.
It's difficult. I mean, there's a lot of specialization on committees. This term, I've served as vice chair of the Joint Committee on Transportation. The chairman, Representative Bill Strauss, he's out of Mattapoisett. My gosh, I think he's been in the House for 28 years. I think he's chaired transportation for, I don't know, maybe the last 10, 15 years. A tremendous person, legislator, a wealth of information. So that's going to be difficult to replace. And I've learned a lot in my 2 years there, developed a lot of contacts with the Registry of Motor Vehicles, the MBTA, the Secretary's office, and transportation obviously is a complicated issue. So there are other committees as well that are losing that experience. And it's like Bill Belichick said, right? Next man up.
But now, I could see them saying, Brian, transportation, it's steady. Shouldn't be any major controversies. You should head it up. And then they see you on Channel 5, and everything is coming around.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, like I said, I was contacted by Channel 5 on an issue that popped up through the Registry of Motor Vehicles very suddenly that affects commercial driver's license holders, and approximately 500 of them. And the registry, apparently without no prior warning, reviewed their records and found about 500 drivers or so who had past offenses many years ago, decades ago, 30 and 40 years ago. And the way the law is drawn up, if you have two particular offenses, it could be an OUI, it could be refusing to take a breath test. And if you have two of those, you have a lifetime disqualification from holding a CDL. So now the registry is coming forth, they're saying, hey, driver, you had an OUI in 1989 and you refused a breathalyzer, your license is going to be, you're disqualified for lifetime for holding this license. Now, these people are businessmen. They've got their own businesses. They work for companies. They've had impeccable driving records for the last 25 years plus, and they get this kind of a notice. So Channel 5 developed that story, contacted me. I looked into it a bit, had some assistance from the staff at Transportation at the State House. And the law, curiously, does allow the registry to establish its own guidelines and conditions that would make a lifetime disqualification a 10-year disqualification. Essentially establish a 10-year look-back period, which is what the federal transportation regulations require. Okay, so the law's in place, so that should be okay. Well, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, for whatever reason, in adopting their own regulations, refused to exercise that discretion. And they issued a regulation saying, despite the ability to reduce a lifetime disqualification to 10 years, the Registry of Motor Vehicle will issue no such guidelines to do so. So to me, that's patently unfair. It's ignoring, I think, relevant information and evidence as to whether or not these folks are safe and capable CDL operators, and it flies in the face of the legislation where they were specifically given the opportunity. So I stepped in and I filed a bill right away to amend the statute to not allow the RMV to have discretion to develop guidelines, but mandate and force them to develop their own conditions and their own guidelines to allow that disqualification to be 10 years. And I filed that bill. I've had a large amount of support from my colleagues. I think at this point I might have, I don't know, 40 or so, maybe 50 legislators who have signed on. And I'm in discussions right now with leadership and with the administration to hopefully try to get this situation, because the operators that it affects are just beside themselves. Their livelihood is at stake. And
So I've got a business, I've got trucks, I've got employees. I did something less than intelligent decades ago, and I've kept my nose clean the whole time since. And I don't get a second bite at the apple?
It's really unbelievable. And again, I think the most important fact, really, because we all want to make sure we have safe commercial drivers operating our roads, but this policy or this action by the RMV does absolutely nothing to recognize the most relevant information, i.e. recent driving record, at least for the last 10 years, to determine whether or not these operators can do so safely.
You got a clean record for 2 decades. I would say that's a trend.
I think so. I think so. I think so.
And plus, if you think of the incentive, we ought to have, if it's somebody who's been doing this every other year, no sympathy. You're not going to help yourself. But somebody who's turned their life around and has had a clean record for, like you say, 10 years, 20 years, to all of a sudden get a pink slip in the mail just doesn't seem not only fair but right.
Yeah, it's not, and I think it's the registry, and this is my speculation, just kind of overcorrecting, from that incident that occurred up in New Hampshire a few years ago where a number of motorcyclists were killed. Yes, so the registry does not have a good track record of maintaining its records and establishing, proper procedures. But at the same time, I don't think you overreach and negatively impact folks who, like you say, have demonstrated that they are safe, responsible CDL operators. It's just not fair.
It just amazes me, because you read in the paper all the time about how some drivers are in for their 5th DUI and they got let go because of they needed to work. Well, without a CDL, the truck drivers are out of business.
Yeah, and the federal standard again is 10 years. Rhode Island, I think Connecticut, maybe New Hampshire, all 10 years. So the crazy thing is if a driver affected lives in Bellingham, if he was one town over in Woonsocket, he wouldn't have to worry about it. So. So that kind of came, and again, that's an example of stuff that, 3 months ago I was not thinking about, I was not planning on, and it just came up very suddenly. It came up out of the blue, and that was an issue that needs to be dealt with. So I thought that the most effective way was to file a bill, and I put an emergency preamble on it that would be effective immediately, and hopefully we can use that to try to get the registry to change their course of policy, or get the bill passed and force them to set the guidelines. So I've advised anybody who's contacted me, I said, look, you've gotten the suspension notice, appeal it right away to the Board of Appeal. And I've got experience with that through my years in private practice, and for good or bad, the Board of Appeal takes a long time to have a hearing, but the decision of the registry gets stayed during that time period. So it would allow these folks to continue to operate, and hopefully we can make a change in the meantime.
I would hope so, because to show up and get a pink slip, and all of a sudden the bank doesn't recognize you got a pink slip, you still owe mortgage. You have those ungrateful children who still want to eat and have clothes and have a home.
And like you cited before, a lot of these fellows are independent operators. They have their own rigs, they have their own trucks, they have their own business, and if that suspension goes in the next day,
they're out of business.
They can't operate their business. And we have a shortage of CDL operators in the first place. So I don't know why we would be targeting these operators who, again, have no offenses on their records, at least for 25 years.
Yeah, and again, it's not people who are reoccurring offenders.
No, the law's in place for that, and yes, the license would be suspended, and probably rightfully so.
And I have no sympathy for somebody like the driver who goes for his fifth DUI and
Well-
cries that he needs it. Well, you got to take some responsibility yourself.
Oh, absolutely, and again, the law that's set up, it's Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 90F, falls under Section 9, and it basically cites two occurrences. So they could be operating under the influence of alcohol, operating under the influence of drugs, refusal to take a breath test, blood test, those kinds. So it's very limited violations. But if you have two of those, the way that law is set up, it's a lifetime. Just you can never have a CDL a license in your life. So that's what the statute is.
Now, did I hear something about le petit voiture, the little French cars?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was another issue that again came up. They're what they call key trucks, which, to be honest with you, I never heard of.
What's a key
A
truck?
key truck is a very small foreign vehicle. They come from Japan primarily, but they're also from, I think, Germany and
We used to
maybe
see them in
France.
France.
Yeah,
Little
probably.
baby trucks.
Yeah, and they're here, which, since I got notice of this issue, now I notice them. I've never really noticed them before. So they're a smaller truck. They don't fit within the standard regulations that the registry has to register motor vehicles. Out of the blue, and this may have been going back in June, maybe May, I'm not sure, the registry issued a notice that these vehicles are not safe. You're no longer going to be able to register them, period. So a number of operators contacted me about it. I looked into it. Well, these vehicles are more than 25 years old. For more than 25 years, the registry has been allowing them to be registered, has allowed them to be on the roads. So I got in contact with the registry.
But wait a minute. The registry says they're not safe.
Yeah.
The registry should have all the data proving that the accident rate or the safety rates are totally above anything else, right?
Well, when it got reached out to me, again, first of all, I had to look into it because I really didn't know anything about it, but I did. And so I reached out to representatives of MassDOT and specifically the registry and essentially said, what's the rationale for this policy? Essentially, I asked, why this, why now?
Why now?
And there were also there's like clubs, I think, folks that have these vehicles and they're very close, and now with social media they have their own groups and everything, so the information spread kind of quickly through social media, because I was getting emails from folks all over the state, not just in my district, although some folks in my district were affected as well. But I was getting emails from folks all over the state say, we saw, because I sent my email off to these people. I said, look, this is what I wrote to the registry. I'll follow up on it and see what I can do. Well, I guess they posted that, distributed or whatever. Say, we really support what you're doing and that type of thing. So we had some back and forth. I would follow up, and the registry got back to me, said, well, okay, we're evaluating that with legal right now. We'll follow up with you. We'll let you know. Had to follow up again. And finally, they issued a notice, and I'm trying to think of when that was. I believe it was sometime in August. The registry's changed their policy. You can continue to register your key truck.
So it's just kidding?
Yeah. And, no one got back to me to answer the question. And I think to your point, quite frankly, I don't think they could. So when I put them on the spot like that, and I think it got public to a degree, they changed their stance.
But are we not recognizing what seems like the fundamental question is, who's watching the store? I mean, where are the records for these CDL drivers? Where are the records that say Joe has been clean for 35 years.
Oh, the registry has their records. They have the driving records. And the search back on the driving records, going back to 1985, 1989, those are some of the dates that come to mind that, folks have contacted me on. They have that information. I think that, the big question, not only with the CDLs, but with the key trucks is, why such an arbitrary decision?
Well, that's my point, saying
So suddenly and out of the blue.
who's done the trending? If somebody trended it out and said these key trucks are dangerous, look, we have an accident rate of X with regular trucks, this is 3X, then at least it would seem like there's some thought goes into it.
It was funny because when this was going on, and I'm trying to learn about it, I'm like, key trucks? What the heck are key trucks? So my wife Emily had an event over in Uxbridge for her beginning bridges. So she said, can you come on over and help me? So I drove over and helped her, and I parked in the parking lot of the Uxbridge school, and I looked to the left of me, and I said, oh my gosh, that's a key truck. And it was parked right there. And I said, okay, now I know what these things are. And it's funny how you learn about stuff, I guess, because you have to. And so they're out there. Yeah, I never noticed them. I wasn't aware
But
of
if
them.
they were a big problem, Brian,
Yeah,
wouldn't we all know what these little key trucks are, or at least be able to recognize one?
absolutely. Absolutely. So, the registry, and a lot of people contact me, and they think because I'm, a state representative involved in the state, I know how the registry works. Well, guess what? I don't. And it's like a black hole. So, it's a very mysterious organization. I mean, obviously it comes under the supervision of the Department of Transportation through the governor's office. We have contacts, and we can, deal with them. But, to your question, which is what I asked, I mean, I don't know how those ultimate decisions were made, where they came from.
You would think that the logic would be something you hide behind. To sit there and say there's more accidents, or we're having problems with repetitive offenses of drivers.
Well, I think it was key to ask them those questions. And to boil it down, I essentially asked, why this, why now?
Yeah.
What's the rationale? What has changed?
So what should have been a quiet committee.
What?
I mean, you think about, of all the issues, when you're sitting on 495 or the Mass Pike with all the backup and the traffic, somehow key trucks don't seem to be at the top of my thought pattern.
No, but that's what comes before us. We have a bill, and I'll tell you this, which I'm working on with staff. So one of the small Western Mass towns filed a bill, home rule petition, to allow the use of golf carts on their roadways, which of course is not allowed under the laws. And they made a huge presentation. The whole town came in, really. The town administrator, all these people came in, and the town, one of the reps on the committee said, oh, this town sounds like it's out of a Hallmark movie. Well, we just want to ride our golf carts around and this and that. So, we got into the logistics. Well, how's it going to be registered? Oh, you'll do that through the town clerk's office. I said, what about insurance? Well, we hadn't really thought about that. I said, well, I think you might want to. So through the discussions of that particular bill, and it came from Chair Strauss, he said, why don't we look to put together a local option bill, because I bet you there's going to be more communities coming forward next session that might want to have golf carts. And I'm thinking maybe some of the towns down the Cape, or maybe some of the other towns in Western Mass. He said if we could come up with a local option bill that would be uniform and would satisfy the registry and satisfy some of these concerns, that would be a good way to address it. So that's something that I'm working on right now, to try to flesh out the parameters of such a bill. Again, not for this session, but what we're doing is kind of building, for next session. And I would hope to be with transportation next session. If I'm not, if they ask me to do something else, then that's fine. But the groundwork would be there, to handle this. So you get, a lot of interesting things come before you.
That's that seems interesting because initially it's some little old person wants to drive the golf cart, but then it's Friday afternoon, people are in a hurry, and somebody's blazing along at 8 miles an hour. You worry that they're going to get antsy and try and pass, and
Yeah, there's a lot of issues to it, and local police chief, was there testifying. Like I said, I think they brought the whole town.
well, you bring up insurance.
Yeah.
Scary movie that you get a big SUV, right, wrong, or indifferent, goes through a light. It would decimate a golf cart.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So they were very the insurance aspect was not fleshed out. We'll put it that way, and the idea of registering with the town clerk, and again, kind of drawing on my experience locally, I don't know that that's such a good idea. The Registry of Motor Vehicles should be able to handle it. They deal with registrations, there is a set of laws that deals with small vehicles. So we're going to try to fashion something where we can maybe come up with a hybrid type
So
registration.
they were
for that.
proposing not using the RMV.
Correct. They just want to have it
Boy,
be
that
the town clerk's office.
so each town would have its own mini. Oh yeah, I can see where that would go smoothly.
Yeah, so that we're gonna, you know what I mean? So that's why the chair, which I think is a great suggestion, let's draft a local option bill that would kind of encompass a lot of these details in a uniform manner. And then if towns want to do it, they can, simply adopt that act. So I think that's going to be the goal on that. And that's something that I'm working on now as well.
Something that comes to mind a little more frequently than small Japanese trucks. Housing.
Yes. And as you know, we passed a major housing bond bill to the tune of $5 billion, all very, very broad in terms of, some of the programs and grant opportunities to increase housing, because we have a housing shortage in the Commonwealth, really throughout the country almost. And that's, I think, a large driving factor in why housing is so expensive and beyond the reach of young families. We've got to increase the housing inventory. And that was the premise behind this bill. It went through both the House and the Senate, passed in an informal session, and the governor has signed it. And one of the key provisions, which I know you're aware of, is to allow accessory dwelling units as a matter of right in residential districts. Many towns, including Milford, had prohibited them in certain districts or required a special permit to get these units. And these are what folks like you and I probably refer to them as the in-law apartments. I don't know if that's cool to call them like that anymore, but that's what we used to.
But in-law apartments, you always think of part of your house.
Yes.
The ADUs can be separate little, that TV show, and the mini houses or whatever they call it.
It could be.
Tiny house.
Yeah, they could be, sure. They could be attached to the principal dwelling, or they could be separate from the principal dwelling. They can they can be up to 900 square feet, or 1/2 of the square foot of the principal residence, whichever is less. They have to have separate egress and entrances, even if they're attached to the principal residence. Towns cannot require special permits for these ADUs. However, the town can require site plan review so that the planning board can weigh in on the layout and the design. And also the ADUs are subject to all existing zoning requirements. For example, setback laws, height, dimensions, that kind of stuff. So you can't put an ADU 5 inches from your neighbor's property line. You have to still conform with your setback of 15 feet or 10 feet or whatever it might be.
But now you got to deal with the sewer, the water. I mean, electricity isn't as hard to figure out. But I would imagine the sewer and water requirements can be complicated.
I don't know in terms of, certainly probably not ones that are attached I think the detached ones could be a little bit of an issue. They'd have to run lines. I think more of a problem would develop when it's involving a septic system.
Septic system.
Yeah, that would be a little bit more involved, I think.
But at the end of the day, I mean, 900 square feet doesn't sound huge, but that was bigger than the house we grew up in when we were kids.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, see, so, and the
You know?
idea is to, of course, allow, increased housing. The idea is greater density, because there is such a shortage of housing. And, we see that in Milford, of course, but, we really see it across the state.
But now, the increased density, how do you deal with the cost?
Cost in terms of,
Well, Paul Abedanza, our financial wizard, once explained to me when I asked him, what does it cost me for every dollar we bring in residential tax? Because you see these new houses being built, and you say, boy, that's going to increase the tax base. But he explained to me that because of school, which is 60-odd%, fire, trash, all, it costs $1.80 in services for every dollar that we bring in tax. Luckily, with the dual tax rate that y'all put in years ago, commercial is 18 cents on the dollar because they don't have school. They don't pay, they pay for their own trash. And industrial was like 16 cents. So if we start putting in all these little houses and they have 1 or 2 kids per house, how do you deal with the extra cost?
That's a big problem with the increased density, and that's why you see the communities like Milton, fighting that MBTA zoning law, which requires a multifamily zoning district in an area where transportation access is, and that went to the Supreme Judicial Court yesterday, as a matter of today. Was it today or yesterday? So that's a big issue with the residential. I think the idea with the ADU is that you will get a family member. You will get maybe 1 or 2, and you might not get families with number of kids. The big problem that we have with the density, which you're talking about, is the 40Bs when they come to town. And as you know, the town recently got hit with 4 new 40B applications. So that's going to be a huge effort, a number of units. Those units will have the families like you talk about, and that does put extra stress on the school system and other services.
Well, we used to think of the example of Laurelwood,
Yes.
where you had all these 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments or condos, whatever they call them. And the school bus would show up and pick up 6 kids in the complex.
Right.
But now you start looking, and people, when I see the prices of new houses, people can't afford 3 and 4-bedroom houses.
Absolutely.
So somehow they're putting in mom, dad, and 2 kids into a 2-bedroom.
Yeah.
When I see the prices, I mean, $900,000 a house sold for in Milford. Brian, when we grew up, you could have bought Milford for $900. They would have thrown in Hopedale and Mendon.
I know, yeah. It's a different time, and hopefully the idea is to increase housing, and that will, create a greater supply, which will, drive those prices down and allow young families to be able to get, houses like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't fault the idea. It kills me when I hear people saying that kids can't live in Milford anymore.
Yeah.
They've had to move 5-10 miles away because the prices of homes are crazy.
Sure, yeah.
And
it's not just Milford. Milford actually, I think, does a little bit better than a lot of other communities. It's a problem really that's across the state and in much of the country.
But we've got to figure out a way of, we're right in the middle of doing a new school.
Yes.
And when we talked about renovating the Milford High School 9 through 12, and people were talking about 180 to 200 million, my heart stopped to think of, we've been lucky in Milford that We did Brookside, and we didn't have to use profanity.
Yeah,
None of the debt exclusion, none of that extra tax.
right.
We did Woodland, again, we were okay. But this is the aircraft carrier.
Oh, absolutely.
And the 200 million, now if we're talking about a 7 through 12, because you look, as soon as we're done with the high school, my opinion only, we're going to start focusing on Stacy.
Sure.
And there's
Back
no,
in the rotation.
that 8-year to 10-year rotation.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's no option of, like, Woodland building bigger.
No, that's about as big as you can get.
I mean, I can't imagine any scenario where we could expand Stacy significantly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it goes back many years, but I mean, I was just leaving the school committee at the time and went over to the select board, but I was never in favor of surrendering Middle School East. It was a building that we had, it was a school, and now we're having issues, you know, with the 8th grade. So that to me was an opportunity lost, and now the town, you know, we have to, you know, decide accordingly.
So that's the biggest worry I have about expanding the housing, is expanding the kids. And I'll be accused of being anti-kid. I can see that coming already. But it's like, you can't not deal with the fact. You can't not deal with the fact that if this building goes to $300 million, we got a lot of people who,
Well, you know, you do, so, I mean, and you reference the dual tax rate, so, I mean, I think a huge opportunity for the town is to continue to try to court and increase business and manufacturing and development, because you're right, the only way you can offset that residential tax burden is to get more commercial industrial to increase the revenue stream. So the two tracks have to operate, you know, on parallel courses.
and we're lucky we have the businesses we have.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because I would shudder, you know, when we say the average house in Milford now is about $6,000 a year in taxes.
Yeah,
It hurts, but when I look across any of the borders surrounding Milford,
yeah.
we're fortunate with the services we offer.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of the focus that the town leaders need to, you know, approach on and deal with it that way. You know, I don't know, to be honest with you, how much of an impact the ADUs are going to have in Milford. We're going forward, as you know, at this town meeting, proactively to adjust our zoning bylaw to accommodate the new requirements in the zoning law. I think it's important to have site plan review as a requirement, so we can see some engineered plans as to what folks are looking to build and develop. And it's not, you know, forgotten that existing zoning still applies.
Well, I think you're right, because we don't have a lot of 3-4 acre lots
No,
that would be obvious targets for a little house. You know, when you look at downtown, there's no room to put little houses.
no, no, there's no room to put anything.
Even, you know, different areas of town, there's some room, but it's not like other towns where they were putting in 3 and 4, 2, 3, 4 acre minimums.
Yeah, when you see the towns with the 2-acre lots,
They're targets.
I think so. I think so.
I heard education is becoming a hot topic again. And funding education. I mean, Milford's been lucky that y'all came through with $7 million extra per year for a couple of years, but those glory days are behind us. How's it look now?
Well, I mean, we're not, you know, the budget cycle has not started, you know, for next year. But, you know, the fair share amendment, which increased the tax on income earners of $1 million and more, has brought in a significant amount of revenue that got split between transportation and education with more of it going towards education. So, there is another funding source, for schools, because of that fair share amendment.
Now, the worry was that people would leave the state in droves. That hasn't happened, has it?
Not from what I've seen. There have been a few studies on it. It's still early, it's still preliminary. The unfortunate part, I think, when they look at who's leaving, and to your point, it's a lot of the young people. It's not folks that, are established and earn, that kind of money. It's a lot of folks just getting out of school, kids who are having trouble adjusting to the cost of living
But these are
in
people who
this
can't
area.
afford to live
Right,
in Mass.
yeah, yeah.
It's not, they're not making millions of dollars a year.
No, no, no. They're leaving because, the cost of living, down south is less, although I don't know
Oh,
if that's still going to be given the kinds of weather calamities that seem to be hitting the south more and more frequently. But no, you're not getting, at least from any reports that I've seen, any kind of direct exodus of high earners because of this tax.
Now, how is the trend coming as far as immigration into Massachusetts? Do you get any insight on? I know you have no control over it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what statistics are, but folks are obviously coming here. There's a lot of strife in the world. The Milford Daily News ran a story about what's going on in Haiti right now, which is absolutely horrific. So you can see why these folks are trying to, protect their families and come here. It's just something that Massachusetts and really the whole country has to deal with. And I think a big part of it is because what's going on in the rest of the world.
Well, they talk about we let in rapists and murderers. Yes, we did, but we can't say we didn't. But just like residents, 99% or whatever will be law-abiding citizens, and you'll have 1% of these immigrants causing problems. They're not worse than our residents, but it happens.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it, if we didn't have a Brazilian and Ecuadorian community in Milford right now, we would not have a Main Street, period. So when you go down Main Street and you look at the Brazilian markets, the Ecuadorian markets, the restaurants, the other service shops that they have, I mean, that's the way, from what I was told, Milford was in the early 20th century when the Italians came to
But
town.
I was going to say, we're saying Ecuadorian, Guatemalan now. Wasn't this the same logic that was used when those Italian people and those Portuguese people
Absolutely.
started coming?
Absolutely.
We wouldn't have a Milford.
So the Italians built the plains, and I remember Mazzarelli's Market, Oliva's Market is still there. It was Tessassini's. I mean, so the whole plains was developed that way, and that's how the town grew at that time. And when you look at Main Street in Milford, and people have varying opinions about it, but the fact of the matter is, these are ethnic stores that are there, and they're doing business. And when you drive down Main Street, on a Thursday night or a Friday night, because, I work on Main Street. I worked on one end of Main Street, now I work on the other end. And, I drive down there. It's active and it's vibrant. There are people there. There are businesses there. They would not be there but for this influx of different nationalities.
Well, like I say, have we let in bad people? Yes.
Well, I don't know if
Okay.
anybody's specifically let anybody in.
Well, no, but if you let in
the problem
100
is,
people, there's going to be one bad one.
the problem is really at the national level, which I think we all know.
Well, it's not Milford.
The folks at the state and the local level, and we've been doing it for years, we have to deal with the ramifications of it. And the fact that Washington is paralyzed, it was so discouraging to see the immigration bill not pass back in February, because that had a lot of things in it that would control immigration so that you'd get a better idea as to who's coming and how. Unfortunately, that didn't pass. So again, we're dealing with the consequences of inaction in Washington.
And again, it's just realistic expectations. You can't say, let's run this test and that's a good person, you get to come. You're not so good, you don't get to come. There's going to be a percentage of people that aren't optimum. But you could look at Milford, 30,000 people, and if you had a good and not so good test, there'd be a lot of residents that wouldn't fit the bill of good people.
Yeah, I suppose, you know. So.
You know, when I look and I say, if somebody comes to this country, puts their head down, like my grandfather did, like my father did, works hard, pays their taxes, and their incentive is to make their family's life better, kind of hard to say they don't deserve the same chance that the Milford people gave my family.
I mean, it's been said often, and it's true, and I don't think that it gets enough attention. Unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant.
Yes.
So, you know, my family, they were not Native Americans. You know, they came from Ireland, they came from Italy, and your family came from Portugal. That's how this country has grown over the years.
And that's what's made us strong. I mean, we are the biggest thieves of good people in the world. I mean, this whole idea of having foreign students come, and everybody says, oh, we lose 75% of them. No, we get to keep 25%.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're not the poorest, non-educated people. They're going to Ivy League schools.
Sure, yeah.
They're starting businesses. We're all benefiting from it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, I get a kick out of when you hear at town meeting that the select board should stop the immigration. And you sit there and say, wait a minute, what are they going to do, deport people to Rhode Island?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's just so much, you know, misinformation out there. There's so much lack of understanding as to, you know, what the issues are, you know, what's practical, what procedures and laws can in fact take place. And that's unfortunate, you know. I mean, you know, the key to a democracy is, you know, a well-educated electorate. And unfortunately, you know, in a lot of places, you know, we don't have that.
And we're fortunate because no matter how hard a life some of these immigrants face, compared to where they're coming from, I mean, you're not worried about Jack or little freckle nose walking out the door and getting shot.
No, and again, like I said, the stories that you read just in Haiti alone, you know, forget about Nicaragua or all these other countries, Venezuela. I mean, Haiti, you know, it's controlled by gangs. They basically thrown out the government. It's warring factions. There's indiscriminate violence, indiscriminate robbings, shootings, extortion. I mean, who wouldn't want to take their family out of that? How can you blame anyone for who would not do that for their own family?
And again, I have a lot of empathy for those people. The ones I don't have are the people that come here and loot, rob. Okay,
Yeah, that's not so good.
not so good. Get rid of
Yeah.
them. If you want to do anything, give me laws that say, Brian, I invite you into my home for dinner. If you start breaking my furniture, I want the right to throw you out.
That's right.
Focus
yeah.
on the 1%
Yeah.
that aren't so good people and leave the 99% to grow our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gun laws hit the
Yep.
stage for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Any,
Well, we passed a major gun bill, and the governor signed it. In fact, the governor just endorsed it as a emergency bill. There's a lot of folks who are opposed to it. The bill itself was under discussion since March of 2023. So that was under the purview of the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, actually. And what happened was there were about a dozen or so hearing sessions that the committee went out throughout the entire state to get public input from folks about guns, some of the issues with guns, some of the folks that want to protect the ability to have guns, folks from all over the spectrum. Our area was at Framingham State, and I attended that, of course. I got to see our old friend Bob Tremblay, who was there. And it was a very active, vibrant hearing. From that hearing, the House drafted an initial bill, which received a lot of opposition. I met locally with representatives of the Maspinock Rod and Gun Club. They had a number of concerns with the bill, offered some very, very constructive comments and information, which I was able to pass on to Judiciary. My office, I wasn't on Judiciary, but I was in the Judiciary wing for 2 terms, one during COVID. So I got to know the staff very well. And a lot of the changes that were suggested went into a subsequent redraft of the bill, which we passed at the House. The Senate passed a bill, and there was a conference bill which was allowed and got through. So, I mean, it does a lot of things. It tries to eliminate the availability of ghost guns, which is a major factor with law enforcement, and they felt very strongly about that. It increases red flag laws, expands the group of people who, if they have questions about a person and their emotional state, they can petition the court to have a hearing to see whether or not that individual should have guns. I think if you look at some of the shootings across the country, if there were some red flag laws similar for the one that happened up in Maine, and the last one with the young boy, I think those red flag laws would have been preventative. I think there's some other registration requirements. So the Gun Owners Action League, they're opposed to this even in its present form, and they're organizing a petition drive to try to have the law repealed, which is certainly within their rights. And there's going to be litigation. They've filed actions to determine whether parts of the law are constitutional or not. The other part limits the areas where people can carry weapons, and it prohibits them from schools, federal buildings, polling places, all in accordance with the Supreme Court decision under Bruin, which was seminal in kind of the determination of this bill.
Well, hopefully it'll sort itself out. I mean, there's certain things that, I'm a gun owner, to be transparent. I've had a shotgun since I was a kid. I followed the laws, so when the trigger guards came out, I went and bought one. I'm supposed to have one. I don't see any problem with that. When somebody says, you can't prohibit me from buying a gun today, anybody that comes in and says, I need a gun right now, would worry me.
Yeah.
If I want to buy a new gun, I can plan 3 days ahead and buy it. So hopefully the wheat and the chaff will get separated. And
Yeah, and it will, and the processes are in place to do that, and it's fine. And, everybody who emailed me on it, I responded to folks either in favor of the bill or opposed to it. Some of the responses I got back, people, were not happy. But, I mean, I gave them information. I gave them what the facts are. Again, in today's world, some people don't want to recognize what the facts are or don't want to believe what the information is.
Well, you're always going to have the people who take the position that don't confuse me with facts when I'm trying to have an informed opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, all I can do is stay open with people, and I mean, I thought that there were a lot of good features in the bill. I think some of the prevalence of gun violence throughout the country, the availability of guns to folks that I don't think are responsible enough to have those guns. I think those are key parts of the law.
Well, this certainly will continue, and we thank you for all your work. And as always, reach out. You have representatives. It's a representative government. Let your reps know how you feel about things so they can better represent you. And as always, we're in the middle of voting. Please vote. I always promised I'd never ask you to vote for a specific candidate. In this case, I can. I don't like your opponent.
Good.
Nobody.
Thank you. Yeah.
But in all fairness, please get out and vote. And as always, thank you. May God bless. To our 6 loyal viewers, thanks for joining us. Good night. May tomorrow be a better day than today.